This video is not really about whether millennials are lazy or not. There's a lot of evidence that suggests that's there to show that they are those things. This video is about why millennials are the way that they are.
Well, yeah.
A video posted this spring gave an interesting account of how millennials are disrespectful. Our generation doesn't have the same basic manners that include no ma'am, yes ma'am. Millennials are lazy and entitled. Glorify Kim Kardashian and shame people like Tim Tebow. And I think there's a lot of truth to that.
I mean, I guess. All right. Yes, that is very much the way that the media trends. However, I would argue that I don't know that it's necessarily all the millennials to blame. I mean, this is a cultural thing overall. I mean, you see 40-year-old mothers watching Keeping Up with the Kardashians as often as you see your average 20-year-old.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about it that way.
I mean, I would say that we're probably... I mean, let's be honest. The media has switched itself to be more sensationalist because that's what grabs our generation's attention, and that could lead into it. But, I mean, I don't think that Kim Kardashian being who she is versus Tim Tebow is entirely our fault. And we may be a part of it.
And I think a lot of it is the change in technology. I think the change in technology has affected the way that people behave. If the greatest generation had cell phones and the internet, they would have been looking at their phones all day too, just like the millennials today. I don't think that the millennials are particularly special in the fact that they are entitled and lazy and so on and so forth.
No, and I mean, we can see that. To step into politics for a second, I mean, you can see that by the fact that Social Security is still standing good and strong the way that it is right now. But your point is definitely fair. We are the ones who have this technology, and we've been affected by it, but you can't say that no other generation would have been.
Yeah, when they say our generation doesn't have the basic manners that include no ma'am and yes ma'am, you could have feminism to thank for that.
Well, that's a whole nother beast in and of itself.
Definitely.
I mean, there's all kinds of things. Like the girl here mentions, one of the big ones that struck me as a gamer was, making friends online versus going out and making real connections. And I feel like she has a point. However, I mean, when you generally look at this person here, this isn't the kind of person who invests hours of their time into a video game and invests hours of their time into these people that you may not have ever seen in person. I feel like that just because they're not in person doesn't keep them from being a genuine connection. I don't think that's a very fair point.
Yeah, she's not the demographic that would understand that, and it's something they don't connect with. The older generation, they don't understand.
Absolutely. It's just not I mean, you didn't get to sit and do things and talk to your friends online back and forth when they lived across the country. You had to send them a letter, and that's not realistic.
Right.
You can't hold a conversation like that as easily as you can through instant messaging.
If you look at the 21 Pilots song Stressed Out, we'll play a little clip from that.
Play pretend, give each other different names. We would build a rocket ship and then we'd fly it far away. Used to dream of outer space, but now they're laughing at the face, saying, wake up, you need to make money.
What I think they're really saying is they weren't really given the tools. When they were raised in such a way that led them to be imaginative and to do things that wouldn't necessarily be productive. And then when adulthood hits, they're not prepared because they weren't taught. They weren't taught, you need to make money. It was like they were given an incorrect set of tools for the world after they were raised.
Yeah, and I see the concept. The only thing I would say is, while yes, that generally does tend to be a feature of the millennials as a whole, is this large group of people who's never been told you have to work for what you want. They're just given things. I mean, myself being a millennial. I don't know necessarily that that's what the song is getting at, though. I mean, it could be. Generally, what I take from the song is just the base concept of... I mean... we've talked about it before. It's the idea of, when I was a kid, you look at it as, I can't wait to grow up. I'll have all this freedom. I can do whatever I want. And then you get to being a grown-up, and you think back, man, what was I thinking when I was a kid? I could do whatever I wanted. You know, now I have bills, I have a job, I have all these things I have to do. It was easy when I was a kid.
Yeah, in Game of Thrones, Tywin Lannister has a quote. He says, "When soldiers lack discipline, the fault lies with their commander."
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a situation we're running into here.
I mean, I definitely don't disagree. And that's what I mean in the sense of I agree that, I mean, it's hard to say that parenting is to blame, but at the same time, we are a generation of kids that are friends with their parents. And, you know, it sounds bad to say that kids shouldn't be friends with their parents, but they shouldn't. They should be your parent first. If you're a friend, you're more willing to let your kids get away with things. And we're just seeing it get worse and worse with the kids today. But that's a key trait of how a lot of millennials were raised. You know, you look from your baby boomer generation when they had kids, you know, or you look back from the generations past, you had generations that were super strict on their kids. And then leading into your 60s and 70s, the kids born then, they grew up in these households that were strict. They had their high moral values. They had all of these things that is what we think of traditional America. And they grew up and wanted to rebel out of that. They wanted to be free. They wanted to grow up and say, I won't treat my kids like that. I'll be cool with my kids. I'll be friends with my kids. And we're the result of that.
Yeah, that ties into this interview with Mark Driscoll and Glenn Beck, where he says,
I have a good friend who's a professor at Yale, and he said, Glenn, I look at the students and they know. They know they've been lied to their whole life. They know their trophies mean nothing.
Yeah.
He said, we're treating them as if they don't know. They know this is a lie.
Yeah, I mean, he definitely makes a point. I think when you look at the higher educated, you look at, this is a professor at Yale. Generally speaking, if you're making it to Yale, you have a bright future ahead of you. You're somebody who's bright, you're intelligent, you're hardworking. You don't get into Yale with C's in high school. You know, like, this isn't like your community college. You don't apply and get in.
right.
And I think these are the kids that understand. These are the youth that, I mean, except for your rare exceptions, there are those yuppie ones, you know, the ones that mommy and daddy got them into Yale. But your average student there is somebody who's worked really hard. They've obviously put in a lot of time. They've put in a lot of effort to making sure that they can go to this school, that they can be in this position. But when you look at the number of people in the millennial generation that just aren't going to college, whether that's joining the workforce right away or living with mom and dad forever, you run into this group of kids who I don't think understand. I don't know if they understand that their participation trophies don't mean anything. When you look at the way that they interact with the world, they seem to think that they are on that pedestal.
Yeah, the late, great Saul Alinsky used to say that you must approach the world as it is, not the world as we would like it to be. You have to accept the reality of the world and what it looks like and how to affect it if you want to get anywhere.
Definitely.
You can't just approach the world in a way that where you've kind of been pandered to your whole life, that you've been good at certain things or you've done certain things that you don't have the skills to do, and when you get into the world you just fall on your face because you haven't seen it before.
Definitely. And I feel like that's the modern workforce is running into that. In the last several jobs I've had, your millennial generation are the more irresponsible of those kids. More people call out. You see more people, you know, coming into work, but they clearly don't want to work. They're just there for the paycheck. Everybody has bad days. Everybody will have that day that you're just not really feeling work. But it seems to be more frequent with people in our generation because they don't have this understanding that you do have to go to work. And you have to work at work. You have to do your job. That's how you get paid. You don't just get a paycheck for showing up.
Right. And that's where the laziness and the entitlement comes from. Another thing Saul Alinsky would always say is that people only react, they only respond to situations that is based within their experience. So your experiences shape how you respond to situations. And if you haven't responded to a whole lot of real-world situations, you're not really in a advantageous position to respond appropriately.
Well, and, I mean, frankly, to be a little on the more edgy side, I think that's where we get all this safe space nonsense. I mean, really. It's all these people that are coming out of mommy and daddy's house, being handed everything, being told you're always right. Now their worldviews are coming into conflict. You're having to deal with the fact that not everybody thinks the same way you do. Not everybody reacts the same way you do. And these kids are coming in completely sheltered and not understanding how to cope with the concept that not everybody thinks the way I do. And they can't take it.
Yeah, they hear something they don't like. They hear somebody say something like the Milos and the Ben Shapiros getting banned from university campuses and not allowed to speak because we don't want to hear what they have to say.
Exactly. I mean, all of these people, you'll hear go on and on and on about their right to free speech as they hold these protests exercising their right to free speech that are protesting somebody else who also exercised their right to free speech. And it's madness because it's this group of people exercising their right to free speech saying this person shouldn't have theirs purely because they don't agree.
Yeah, Prager University did a small video on that where they want to support freedom of their speech and they want freedom from speech.
Yep. Anybody is allowed to have any opinion they want as long as it's mine.
Yeah, and it's interesting how the Gen Xers and the Boomers, when somebody mentions, oh, these children were raised by Gen Xers and Boomers, that's why they are the way that they are. They'll say, oh, you're just blaming your problems on somebody else, just like all millennials do.
And I mean, it sounds that way, but when you look at the way that people grow, it's the old question of nature versus nurture. So this leaves us two options. The first option, nature. Nature is the reason that we are the way we are. In which case, humanity's doomed. I mean, that's our only option. If nature has decided that this entire generation, or the majority of this generation, are going to be lazy, disinterested in work, expectant of handouts, if that's what nature has led us to, then we're just doomed as a species, because it's only going to get worse.
Right.
Now, the option that makes more sense to me, since nature kind of has a way of wanting to survive and wiping a species by means of its own genetics changing, doesn't sound very nature-esque to me. So the other option is nurture. And it's pretty apparent that nurture has a huge way, or a huge impact on the reason that we become the people that we do. So, given those two options, nature versus nurture, if the only realistic one is nurture, then yeah, I mean, maybe we are making questionable decisions on our own, and that's fine. We do need to take accountability for our decisions. But it does need to be understood that we learn to be who we are from our parents, from our grandparents. That's how this works.
Bottom line, your life is always coming down to your responsibility. But to disregard that certain things have influenced the way that people think and it puts them at a disadvantageous position is silly.
Yeah, it's intellectually dishonest. I mean, it's like if you have a pet, if you have a dog, and you leave the box of treats for your dog on the coffee table where the dog can reach it. The dog then, while you're gone, jumps up and eats the box of cookies, the box of dog treats. Are you mad at the dog? Yeah, the dog ate the treats. But ultimately, you left the treats there. I mean, at that point, you are an enabler at best. Like I said, we do, as a generation, we do need to take responsibility for our own actions. You know, it is something that is important to, like, really come to grips and understand that, you know, these are our flaws and these are the things that we need to work on and work towards, you know, becoming better at, becoming a better people.
Yeah, but we shouldn't disregard that the millennials were raised with values that come into conflict with the real world.
Exactly. There's no participation trophy in the real world. You don't get to show up and get rewarded for it. You have to put in the effort.
Well, I think that's where today's show ends. Come back next week.